So I wanted to talk with you a minute. I started writing a blog post and I thought, man, this is a great time to share something as people finish their football seasons. So I was talking to some friends who just finished their seasons over the last couple of weeks, and the one thing that stood out was the number of them that were disappointed with obviously the way the season ends. If you don't win a state title, you're probably not happy because you didn't win the last game. And that's the ultimate vision right there, is you want to win that last game. I used to like to say the goal is to win the next one. The vision is to win the last one. But they said they were disappointed with the way the season finished. And they felt like they underachieved. So I talked to a lot of coaches that felt like they underachieved this season. They didn't meet the expectations that they'd set forth. And one of the biggest reasons, as we dug deeper, was that they felt their team lacked discipline in big moments. One coach told me, we were more talented than the three teams that beat us, but when it came down to it, those teams were more disciplined and more hungry, and they made less mistakes, and we made some fatal mistakes. And what it really comes down to is two things: discipline and accountability. I know in my career, the biggest disappointments where I felt like we didn't achieve at the levels we should have came down to where we made undisciplined mistakes and we lacked that accountability and discipline. So I wanted to just take a minute and talk to you guys and give you some things that you can use as you begin building towards 2022. A lot of people, when they look at football, think it all comes down to talent. Well, I can tell you that I've been coaching on teams where we did not have as good a talent as the teams we played, and we were able to overcome that and win some games we probably shouldn't have. I've also been on the other side where we've had far superior talent, and we've lost to teams with inferior talent. And what it all came down to was discipline. See, when you don't have discipline on the field, you're going to have penalties on third down on defense that extend drives for the other team. You're going to have mistakes on offense that lead to long yardage situations, or you're going to turn the football over. On special teams, you're going to get kicks blocked. You're going to get kicks returned. You're going to lose the field position battle. You're not going to be able to convert on third down, and you won't be able to finish in the red zone. Those things all come from a lack of discipline. We all know that talent, all right, when you have more talent, you should probably win more games. And when you have less talent, you're probably going to have a more difficult road. I want to get that out of the way right now and talk about things that you control. See, as a high school coach, you don't control the level of talent that comes into your program. All right, that the genetics of your athletes were determined 14 to 18 years ago. But you do have control over the development of each of them athletically. You have the development that you control of them academically, and then also with their discipline, leadership, and character. You can control how you develop those things. When they're in your field house, when they're on your practice field, when they're in your weight room, when they're in your meeting rooms, you have control over what you do with that time. So there needs to be no excuses. So as we look at this, I want to give you some things that you can really use. One of them is, what is discipline? All right, what is discipline? What's a definition? I think you've got to define it. And discipline is doing what you're supposed to do, when you're supposed to do it, the way it's supposed to be done, regardless of whether you feel like it or not. That's discipline. And then what happens is, how do you handle adverse situations when you're tired, when you're struggling, and when things aren't going your way? See, everybody has discipline when they're comfortable. It's easy to be disciplined when things are easy. How do you handle things when they get difficult? All right, when things get difficult and you don't have discipline, that's when you're going to make undisciplined mistakes. When we talk about accountability, all we're talking about is eliminating the negative behavior. This is the process of eliminating the negative behavior while changing mentality. See, it's not enough just to eliminate the behavior. You want to also change the entire mentality of that person. As a coach, we have to have a way to hold athletes accountable, because accountability is where we build discipline. And when I'm talking about building discipline, I'm talking about self-discipline. Not discipline from the outside, but discipline from within. When you have high expectations, which you need to have high expectations, but you have low accountability or no accountability, you're going to underachieve. When you have low expectations, but you have high accountability, you're still going to underachieve because your expectations aren't there. See, you have to set standards. Head coaches, you have to set standards. Assistant coaches, you have to have standards for your position coaches that align with those of the program and the head coach. The mission, vision, and values all have to be aligned with this accountability and discipline. Now, people talk about coaching hard. Oh, he coaches hard. Listen, let's eliminate that term, all right? What you want to do is be able to be honest with your athletes at all times. How do you do that? See, if you coach kids, and we've all coached hard to coach kids. We've coached easy to coach kids. The easy to coach kids, no matter what you say and how you say it, they take it and say, yes, sir, and they go and they're going to run through that wall. And then you got the hard to coach kids. Those are the kids that sometimes it's going to cause conflict, all right, when you hold them accountable, when you're honest with them, when you tell them they're not living up to the standards that you've set and the standards that hopefully they've set for themselves. Well, what you have to do before you can be honest and reduce the conflict is you have to have a relationship. But a lot of coaches make the mistake of building the relationship and then not making the impact. And the impact comes through the accountability, which builds a self-discipline. The relationship is not the impact. The relationship gives you permission to make an impact. It gives you permission to hold them accountable to being their very best self. I bet if you look back at all the seasons where you've lost to people you shouldn't have, where you lost in the playoffs to someone you shouldn't have ever lost to, it came down to at some point a lack of discipline, because lack of discipline leads to a lack of execution. A lack of discipline leads to fatal errors that lead to losing games you shouldn't lose. And ultimately, when you lack accountability and discipline, here's the big thing. Your athletes are going to leave your program and they are not going to have the tools they need to be successful. One way you can measure this is look at your athletes when they leave you. What happens? When they go to college, are they successful? Are they able to withstand the rigors of college and thrive? Or do you have guys coming home 2 weeks into college because things are too hard? Do you have guys making bad decisions when they go to school? Those are all things that we develop as coaches. We have to take pride in that. We have to look at the fruit we're bearing. And if we're falling short as coaches, we have to say, all right, we have to make changes. David Diaz, who I worked with at Columbus High School, taught me a valuable lesson when it comes down to bearing that fruit and developing young men for their futures, not just for a football game on Friday night. And when we talk about accountability, all right, everybody here has the kids, you got them pushing plates or doing some sort of accountability when they make a mistake. All right, sometimes you might start off, you're going to talk to them, and if that doesn't change it, then you're going to go to the next level where they have some physical exertion going on, and maybe you're going to punish not only them, but their position group, different things like that. That's all good. What Coach Diaz taught me was the number one thing that matters to your players is playing time. And you have to be willing to hold them accountable by withholding playing time. I'm going to say that again. You have to be willing to hold players accountable by withholding playing time. I remember when he said our best running back wasn't going to be able to play because he had skipped a class. He skipped 7th period one day, one class, and then came to practice. And the teacher called and said, this young man skipped 7th period. And we called him in, and the head coach talked to the kid, and the kid said, yeah, I just didn't feel like going. He said, all right, well, I guess you don't feel like going to the game Friday. And then tells me as the offense coordinator, you're not going to have your best running back. Tells the defense coordinator, you're not going to have your best linebacker, because this kid never came off the field. Played everything, offense, defense, special team, leading rusher, leading tackler. But he doesn't get to play on Friday. We've got to make adjustments for that. And I said, Coach, how are we going to win? He said, I don't care about Friday. I care about his future. And what's going to happen when players start to see that you will punish the best player by taking playing time, you're willing to hold him accountable. I hate using the word punish. To punish him would be to do nothing, to let it go. That's the real punishment, because then you build a sense of entitlement. That's when you punish kids. But when you have that accountability to say, listen, you can't play Friday because you're not taking care of business where it's most important. If you have a kid being uncoachable, not listening in practice, maybe ruining a drill, the drill killers, the energy vampires, and you take that playing time away, that will start the process of changing the behavior a lot more than running after practice or doing some up downs and things like that. And I remember Coach Diaz when I said, do we need to run these guys after practice? We had a couple of kids that have been jacking around in school. He said, no, they just won't play. We're not going to punish the whole team or punish ourselves by running people. They're just not going to play. We had to overcome that as a team, but here's what happens. See, when you do that, everybody else sees it. The problem with most coaches, and I'm just being honest here, is that they have two sets of standards. One for the really good players and one for everybody else. Because we all know that a lot of times your really good players are your hardest players to coach. And when I say hardest players to coach, I mean the guys that don't always listen the best. They have other things going on, but that doesn't mean they get to set a new standard. You can't say, well, we're not going to hold him accountable because it's hard or because he's going to get mad or because he might quit. Those are all things that could very well happen. But what are you doing for that young man if you let him, allow him to be able to do whatever he wants, regardless of the standard, with ramifications that do not affect his playing time? See, if you put, I remember talking to a kid that I had coached many years ago, one of those kids that was always doing something he shouldn't be doing. Phenomenal player, phenomenal athlete. And I remember him telling me, yeah, coach, when you used to make me push plates and get out and do duck walks and things like that, he said, that really didn't affect me. He said, now, when Coach Diaz said I couldn't play, he said, that affected me. That's why I changed. That's why I changed. Well, that young man went on to be a good father and husband, and he's very successful in the world right now. And he will tell you that the accountability that hurt in high school helped him to become a man. There was a young man we coached that we had to eliminate from our program because he couldn't meet standards. We had to tell him he couldn't come back. Well, he told me a few years later, it was actually about 7 or 8 years later, and he was mad. He was bitter. He was bitter for a while. But after he grew up, went to college, and started his family, I ran into him. And he said, Coach, the best thing that you did for me was told me I couldn't play because I was a knucklehead. And he said that was the first time anybody had ever taken something away from me that really mattered. See, it's not about winning or losing football games. Yes, that is important. But what impact are you making, and are you willing to sacrifice that discipline and accountability that's going to help a young man grow simply to win football games? That's a question. Now, here's the other thing. If you're going to allow those things, if you're not going to hold people accountable off the field, they're going to break your heart on the field. You're going to have people that are going to get into a big game, and you've allowed things to happen, and they're going to run a wrong route. They're going to take a step with the wrong foot. They're not going to have good eye discipline. All those things come from the accountability and discipline that you build in your program. That's going to lead to their level of execution. And that's why you see teams with inferior talent beating teams with superior talent as we get into districts and the district seasons and the playoffs. Because they execute at a high level because they have discipline and accountability. And then mental toughness becomes a part of that too. Mental toughness, we define it simply as the ability to overcome adversity, failure, and negative events without a loss of attitude, effort, or enthusiasm. So you're going to go through some really hard stuff. You're going to go through some things that aren't fair. You're going to go through some things you don't understand. Is that going to affect your effort? Is that going to affect your attitude? Is that going to affect your resiliency? Is that going to make you quit? Is that going to make you get mad? Or are you going to rise up and overcome the challenge? See, and that's what we have to develop as coaches. When we develop discipline and accountability, we develop discipline by holding players accountable to the standards that are set. The standard's a standard. It's that simple. Even the guys that are hard to coach, even the guys that are going to cause a little bit of conflict when you are honest with them and hold them accountable, even with those guys, are we willing to do that so that we can build that mental toughness, and then discipline equals high-level execution? Are you going to have guys that can execute on Friday night? And I wanted to talk about this today because as we build into that, that's where the relationship comes in. So the relationship, as I said, is not the impact. The relationship gives you permission to do the things it takes to make the impact, to help develop the person mentally, all right? To be able to not only change behavior, but to help them to grow mentally, to have self-discipline. And you have to make relationship deposits. So I want you to think of the relationship this way. It is a bank. It is a bank that is not open as much during football practice or football games as it is open after practice, in the locker room, in the coach's office, in the hallways at school, in the library, in the cafeteria, at basketball games, at soccer games, at other sporting events, when that athlete's competing in another season. When you're talking to them about things other than football, when you're talking about their goals, their dreams, their fears, what they really want out of life, what you can do to support them, they're going to tell you that. What you maybe need to stop doing to support them. And sometimes they're going to tell you to stop holding them accountable. You can't do that. But building those relationships, spending time outside of sport, is making a deposit in the relationship bank. See, when you go to coach someone, quote, hard, all right, when you're honest with them, telling them they're not living up to your standard or the standard they should have set for themselves, the more of a deposit you've put in the bank, the more of a withdrawal you could make. If you have not put anything in the bank, if I go down to the bank down here in Lubbock, I go down to Happy State Bank and I don't have, I put $50 in the bank and I try to take $1,000 out, I can't unless I rob it, and that ain't good. It's the same with a player. You're robbing the relationship bank if you've only put $50 in, but you're going to try to give them $100 worth of coaching. You can't do that. So you've got to invest. You've got to put money in that relationship bank. You've got to set the standard. You've got to be clear with the standard, and you've constantly got to be holding people accountable to the standard and then reteach the standard. If someone now, and this is the other question you have to ask when someone doesn't meet the standard, were you not clear on the standard? Or did they not care about the standard or just ignore it? See, if they missed the standard because you weren't clear on it, that's on you, not them. Coach them. Teach them. Now, if they were clear on the standard and they chose to fall below the standard, they chose to ignore the standard, no earrings in the weight room, and they wear an earring in the weight room and they knew they weren't supposed to wear it, now you need to have a different kind of accountability. Now you need to have that process in place to change behavior. If it was something where that athlete wasn't clear because you didn't explain it to them the right way, you didn't teach them the right way, now you go through a reteach process so they know the standard. Discipline is going to lead to high-level execution, but discipline is not developed without accountability. And accountability requires work. I'm going to tell you this, men, it requires work. There's going to be some conflict, but you've got to be willing to make those relationship deposits. All right. So as you begin, as you begin your off season, your season's ended. A lot of times people go on cruise control in December. Don't do that. This is when you start to build that accountability right now. This is when you can start to put things together in your weight room. Teach them the process of how your weight room will work and how your accountability in the weight room is going to work. Teach them the expectations. Define for them visually. Define for them verbally. Define for them kinesthetically. This is what our squat looks like. This is what each rack should look like. This is how your weight should be hung. All those details, those little things that you say, well, we don't have time to teach that. Teach that right away first. Once you get that stuff taught, they come back in January. Now you're going to be able to hit the ground running. Oh, everybody wants to get bigger, faster, and stronger, and you're going to do that. But if you're going to get bigger, faster, and stronger, but not hold the guys accountable, that's going to be a problem. And I'll leave you with this. I heard some media people talking about a coach that said, man, the kids would run through a brick wall for him. Here's what happens in a lot of cases. You get a coach that builds a great relationship but doesn't have accountability. And everybody says the players will run through a brick wall for him. The problem is, because they don't have that discipline and accountability, they don't have execution, they end up running through the wrong dadgum wall. Or when they can't get through the wall, because the wall's a little bit bigger, tougher, and thicker than they've had to go through before, they can't figure out a way around it, so they get frustrated and just beat their head against it. So what you have to do is make sure that as you build that relationship, you also build the discipline and accountability so that when they run through that wall for you, they're running through the right wall. I wish you guys the best of luck as you begin preparation for next season. Remember, if you've had disappointment, if you've had teams that underachieved, look at yourself and what you have done to develop that and how you can use high standards and discipline, accountability to develop discipline within your athletes. If there's ever anything I can do, I'm at Twitter at Coach Vint. I'm here for you. I want to see you be successful. I want to see your athletes be successful. And I want to see you make an impact that's going to last beyond Friday night.